Good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Good. My name is Eric Pierson, and I'll be moderating a panel today. We are going to have a conversation about underrepresented voices in film. One of the things that I think Roger has always been sensitive to is bringing films to the festival that show us a different side of the world. And I've always, this is my 14th year here, and it's one of the things that I most value in my experiences is to come and be able to see films and the variety of voices from around the world. So what we have today is we have assembled a pretty broad cross-section of folks who are affiliated with the festival, who have films here. So what I always like to do is have people introduce themselves, let you know what film they're here with, or what is their role here at the festival, and then I will throw out some questions and get the conversation started, and at the end, we'll have time for folks to ask some questions from the audience. So we'll start with you, Caroline.
My name is Carolyn Briggs. I'm here as a screenwriter of Higher Ground, and I wrote the memoir. It was based on This Dark World.
My name is John Davies. I wrote, produced, and directed Phunny Business, a comedy documentary that premiered on the first night of the festival.
My name is Raymond Lambert. I am a co-writer with John and producer on Phunny Business, Black Comedy.
My name is Kelechi Ezie, and I'm an actress and writer and co-producer of the short film The Truth About Beauty and Blogs.
Hi, my name is Jaideep Punjabi. I'm the producer of the film Patang, The Kite, and this is my lead actor, Nawaz.
I'm Nawaz. I'm from India. I acted in Patang. Thank you.
I'm Darren Dean. I'm the producer of the film Kinyarwanda, which played yesterday.
Doc Erickson. I'm here as an observer again, and glad to be here. Thank you.
My name is Ishmael Ntihabose. I'm a storyboard and executive producer of Kinyarwanda film. Thank you.
My name is Michelle Davis. I'm here with the film Kinyarwanda, as well as just a friend of the festival.
I'm Richard Leskosky, a recent retiree of the Department of Media and Cinema Studies here. I write film reviews for the News Gazette, and I've been involved in exhibition and distribution of short independent films many years ago. So.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. So I'm going to start with an observation and then ask you all to respond to it. One of the things that I've noticed is we have some really brave films here this year. Films that take us places and show us things in ways that are unflinching, that we don't turn away from them. And what I'd like to ask you all is, as creators of these films, when you were putting them together, did you feel like you were doing something that was brave? And was that frightening? Was that exhilarating? And are you happy now that the product is out there, that you sort of, people have been able to experience it in the way that you wanted them to experience it? So that's a lot of stuff to start with. So whoever wants to jump in here, please do. And crickets.
I guess I can start. My film, Higher Ground, is a look at evangelical Christianity, and I wouldn't say it's underrepresented in film, but it's misrepresented, and that was something that Vera Farmiga and I wanted to address, because we didn't feel like Christians were portrayed as three-dimensional people, that they were portrayed as morons or hypocrites or something else not very respectful. And so putting it out there and being willing to tell the real story with a nuanced eye was hard to do. And a lot of people find the film too secular for religious people and too religious for a secular audience. But I'm happy we did it. And I do think it took some bravery on our part.
Just go online.
Yeah, absolutely.
I sell a lot of shows in Hollywood targeted at African American audiences, and I work a lot with Russell Simmons and Stan Lathan, who have both been very successful. But as they always remind me, it's really hard selling black in Hollywood. But I've been doing it for so many years now that there is a way to get anything sold, really. You just have to find that one executive that believes in it and wants to do it. And I call it partnering up. Selling things on my own have been difficult, but I know it's hard to get to some of these people, but if you can get to the Quincy Joneses, if you can somehow get to the Oprahs, if you can get to the people who have power out there, you can at least get your thing seen and given a fair shake. I work more in TV than I do in film. I do a documentary once every 8 years, and then it takes me another 8 years to recover financially. But it just, partnering up is the way to get something made, for me anyway. That's been the secret. You've got to find somebody who's accepted, who is going to embrace your idea and give you a little help, at least get the door open for you to get something made, produced, and in my case, I always try and get it on the air, as we say in TV.
Yeah. Okay. I guess definitely the fear for me was just that my short film was my first screenplay, but I collaborated with a wonderful group of people, my director, who mentored me through the process, and so it was kind of my concerns were more just what will people think of this? This is my weird sense of humor, but that's the beauty when you're making something of your own, is that you can just kind of take a risk and put it out there. And I wasn't dealing with on the level that John is with worrying about people greenlighting it or anything. It was just me co-producing it on my own.
So my film Patang is set at a kite festival that takes place in India, and I didn't grow up there. I grew up in Hong Kong and have lived in New York for the last 18 years. And my director Prashant, he also did not grow up in India. I think the personal journey for me about making the film was, we would go back to India in my youth all the time. We'd spend the summers over there, and we would come across these amazing stories about families, our own families, people that we would know, and we would never see these on screen. They were never represented in really in any way in Indian cinema. We had Bollywood films, which were wonderful musical spectaculars, and then there was a lot of independent cinema in India that kind of focused around rural communities and feudalism and things like that, which, while very compelling, didn't really speak to the stories that we were experiencing when we were there. So my journey into making the film and my desire to make it kind of came from wanting to show what I was seeing and experiencing when I traveled back to India on screen. And it's been a long journey kind of getting there, but I think that was a route for how I got engaged into the project. And the film is interesting because it is a family drama, and the city in which we filmed is a hotbed of religious tension. It is it has a history of all of the Hindu-Muslim riots, like in the country. It's one of the most active spots for that kind of activity. But what we chose to do was focus on what life meant like for families that were there, that were outside of that violence. They'd been impacted by it, but life kind of went on. So we were trying to get into portraying their point of view. So it was very much about trying to find the stories that were human within that area.
My experience was very scary because it was a real environment and real people. I can't express myself in English, so my producer will interpret actually. एक सीन था जिसमें एक शॉपकीपर है, तो उस वहाँ पे हमें 3-4 चश्मे चोरी करने थे.
So Nawaz is illustrating his experience through a scene that they were filming where he was let go in a live environment, and the task that the director had given him was to steal 3 pairs of sunglasses from this vendor. We shot on live locations with a lot of non-actors mixed into the scene.
तो 2 चश्मे तो मैंने चोरी कर लिए, तीसरा जब चोरी कर रहा था तो उसने हाथ पकड़ लिया यहाँ से.
So he was stealing the first 2 pairs and things were fine. When he went for the 3rd pair, the shopkeeper grabbed his arm.
तो इतने में ये लोग डायरेक्टर्स और प्रोड्यूसर ये सब लोग आ गए तो मेरी जान बची वहाँ से तो हम लोग फिर निकले तो बहुत इट वाज अ वेरी स्कैरी एक्सपीरियंस एक्चुअली
I think you guys got that without me translating. The entire production team kind of flooded him as soon as that happened and calmed the shopkeeper down and kind of made sure that he was safe. I think the story illustrates kind of the way in which we were working and kind of making the film over there. It was very much about being immersed into the community and kind of shooting in a live environment. And the purpose behind that was to really kind of get at the story of the people in the city. It was very much about just allowing the life that was taking place over there to unfold on screen to kind of get to our story.
When Alec first asked me to go to Rwanda to shoot Kinyarwanda, being a dumb white guy from New Jersey, my first question was, is it safe? Which was a really stupid question because it's actually one of the most beautiful places in the world. I think that's where where I initially thought like, oh, this is going to be, the scary part of it. The most difficult part, I think, was, as John said, this is my second film in a row with African leads, and it's an incredibly difficult sell. That's the bottom line. And so going into it, knowing that, it is what it is. So, I looked at other challenges, and I think that probably the strongest challenge was making this film, knowing that we were making it with actual survivors of the genocide, and having them tell their story, and allowing us to kind of guide them through that process. It was a kind of a soul-stirring experience. So that, I think, ultimately was the most difficult for me, I think, part of this journey. And I don't know that we all realized it until we were back on the soil here. But of course, we were a couple of Americans, going over and shooting a film in Rwanda, so there were constant challenges, just working within one another's infrastructures and stuff like that.
My lifetime activity was not in the creative side of filmmaking, but I do understand those problems. I was always a hired gun, so to speak, so didn't have to go through the problems that some of these fellows had to do to get their films made. And mine were all set up for me, and we just had to administer them. So I was lucky.
I guess to me it was not easy. Coming from Rwanda, being a survivor, never holding a position of the executive producer. Want to tell the story of forgiveness, they want to forgive someone. Don't know the directions, the life after the film. Having director comes from the state, tells you that this, do you need to see this film at different stage when it's end? I don't know exactly what those stages are, which I am today. Thank you, Mr. Eric Brown. And knowing that who's gonna watch up the film at the end. So it was, to me, it was challenges, actually. And having a background of engineering, studied himself in the filmmaking, so it was all the challenges. But today, you can see the life of the film. He proved me wrong. Mr. Eric Brown is sitting in the back. I was like, would you want to see this film on different stages? Where do you want to take this film? So today, he was right. So he was right to take him this film, to tell him that let's have a vision of this film, targeting different audiences, turn it into feature film. There's so much was going on, actually, producing such particular films to me, and fighting with some of the crew members, some of the, you destroy the life of the film itself, and you don't know it, you are killing the film itself. So I was killing the film. Eric Brown and others, they said, "Are you killing the film? How can I kill the film?" So it was a hard journey, but I thank Eric and the American crew, Darren Dean, everybody. At least we've achieved that, and we have the film today. she was learning a process, but hard learning. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure how much I can add to what everyone has already said, but I'm a non-filmmaker on the panel. So for me, with Kinyarwanda, I was legal representative. And along with Kinyarwanda and other films, I get this great opportunity to kind of see the journey of the film, to see how audiences respond, and in some ways to step outside of my personal limitations as far as the boldness of what these filmmakers are doing and the messages that they're giving to the audiences and the perspectives they're showing of different parts of the world. And so I feel like it's really kind of a selfish position for me, because I get to see everything up close and personal. And I'm always excited just to see what filmmakers have done and the challenges that they've had to endure. And I mean, it's just a wonderful ride, you know, as I have been different places with Kinyarwanda, and whether it's different festivals and just getting to meet different people and to really see the impact that the film has, and talking about forgiveness. And, you know, I look forward to seeing all the other films here at the festival. And it's just, I mean, this part of it is easy for me, and I think it's just a great opportunity. So I'm always privileged to be front row with it.
Well, as I said, I'm not a filmmaker, don't have a film in the festival. But one thing I noticed this year in particular, looking at the end credits of the films, that there are actually a lot of different film companies or corporate entities of one sort or another involved in the production. And that suggests to me that the filmmakers are in a situation not where they just have to convince one executive at a Hollywood studio that this needs to be made, but they have to keep going through that process of convincing individuals at a number of stages of the production in order to get it made, to get it distributed, and so on. So it's I suspect that for each of our films here, there's a sort of considerable backstory that has nothing to do with the story on the screen, but has a lot to do with getting the story onto the screen, and that's another, let's say, problem or situation that all these filmmakers have to face.
Yeah. Carolyn, you raised the point about that your film is not, it's not sort of tipped enough for either group, sort of either people who are watching the film. So I'd like to follow up with that, but also ask the group, when you're dealing with underrepresented or misrepresented groups in film, what then becomes, how do you balance that? Because you know, the question I had written down here, in showing your films, what is it that people seem to be misunderstanding about what's in your film and what you're trying to do, and how you sort of put the whole thing together? Because when you don't have those voices out there, the first time that people hear them, they get interpreted through whatever frame they happen to have in place. And oftentimes that's where the danger is because you want one thing to happen, but sometimes something else is happening. So if we can start with you, and I'd really like to have Raymond jump in here and talk about his experience with his film. But
oh, it's a very good question. Yes. What happens when an audience is watching A Higher Ground in particular, I think that they're experiencing a lot of dissonance because it's a new look at a people that, let's face it, America's pretty split, right? We're the red state, blue state country. And people are uncomfortable to face a reality that they have been before so eager to push aside and not to encounter. So to encounter these three-dimensional people that are really kind of like us, you know, they care about the same things that we do. It means you have to process and allow them to be human beings And that's difficult for some people to let go of, because it's easy to disregard a population or an ethnicity or anything else, but to see them as real human beings. And that's the power of film. You know, this is my first encounter with film, because I've only had the written word before, but to see how visually you can get that message across has been such a great experience. And people have been open. I spoke 2 weeks ago at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. So I watched this film with the group of seminarians, and every F word I just died at. If some of you have seen the film, there's penis drawings, right? So the camera was slowly panning these penis drawings, and I thought, please move faster. But the cool thing is that they liked what they saw, and they were clapping, they were into it. So an audience I didn't think would be touched has been touched, maybe more so than the secular audience, who's still kind of processing this real look at evangelicals.
I think for our movie, sort of towards the end of it, actually, I just, when I connected with John, was just basically wanting to tell this story about this place that existed with all these fantastic people who had came through, and I had the pleasure of working with. But as we moved on and into it, I found kind of odd when folks would say, well, we had no idea that this place even existed. And in a city like Chicago, where I felt like we were making a lot of noise and we were doing some really, really fantastic things, but dealing with the whole, when you say underrepresented voices, it's like you're in a city like that, and there's a whole segment of the population that just has no idea that you even exist, even with the talented people that we had that we were working with. So I think in doing the film, I'm always interested to how audiences look at it and give them an insight into the fact that these type of places exist physically, or say, like in all jokes aside, that there are these places that are out there that are well run, that are well established, that have an incredible amount of talented people that are working there, and it's defined on its own terms, which for me, the whole Hollywood experience is very difficult, because entrepreneurially speaking, it just doesn't make any sense to me why in particular, African-American films are underrepresented, given the audience and the box office numbers and the support that you have for film. It just doesn't, it's just rather odd. But with our movie, it's, one thing I'm happy about is just to sort of shed light on the business side of it, and that these particular places do exist.
Kelechi, have you had any people responding to your online thing in ways that you hadn't expected?
If anything, mine, it's been a really positive experience, because I've screened in a number of different places with completely different demographics of audiences in terms of age, ethnicity, gender, and there is something that everyone relates to or finds funny about it. And often, it's different things depending on the crowd. So, sometimes it's more, people saying, well, my daughter is online all the time, and that reminds me of her, or women saying to me that I had one screening where someone said, I went through that same thing with my friend went through that same thing with her boyfriend, and I was like, oh, really? But it's been really positive so far. And if anything, since I'm just starting out, I've been in more projects of other people's, and I've made my own, and that is more where I experience kind of what you were saying with, it's just feeling the pressure of interpreting a role and wanting to portray a complete character and not a stereotype, and kind of just wincing when you get certain directions from people, and you're like, oh, if you could put it a little differently, that I would just go all in. But you just feel that this pressure that you don't know how what you're doing is always being perceived, and you do feel like not an undue pressure, but a pressure that maybe other segments of performers don't have to deal with when you're a woman and a woman of color. So.
Anyone else want to weigh in here?
I'll jump in. Eric said something yesterday on one of the panels that perhaps we don't know just how brainwashed we are. And I'm about to convey something that I saw yesterday. I mean, and Eric said something earlier about, you know, just black voices, so to speak, and why is it that they're considered underrepresented. But I was watching a news program yesterday, and, you know, for me, I know that the #1 film at the box office was a film called Think Like a Man, which, you know, happens to be a film that is probably geared more towards black audiences. But to, you know, on this program, they were talking about all the films and saying, hey, what's happening in the box office? And it was never mentioned. And I just found that kind of odd to say, okay, here's the #1 film in the country, but yet it was never mentioned. And it just raised a question on why. I think sometimes, you know, the powers that be, if you will, are deciding what audiences want to see or what they will accept. And as I come to different festivals and I'm, you know, traveling with various films that I've worked with, and I see the diversity in the audience and films that maybe some folks may think the audience will not accept, they really do. And I just think that, you know, just as a society, I guess we just have to allow folks to make their own decisions in terms of what they really would like to see. I just thought it was a very interesting point, and I don't know if anybody else has any comments about that, but I just found that very interesting, that the film wasn't ever mentioned, even though it was clearly the #1 film in the country.
Sure, I'd like to kind of illustrate with an anecdote. I live in New York City. I often eat from a food truck that is owned by a Latino family. So a husband, wife, and a son. And I was purchasing food the other day, and the son comes to me and he says, hey, my mom wants to talk to you. We saw a program on, it was either National Geographic or BBC about India. And my mom does not want to go to India. And I was like, what are you talking about? That sounds crazy. So she comes and she starts talking to me, and she says that, hey, there was this festival that was taking place in India by the banks of the river, and there was a lot of color over there, and it looked great, but people were kind of crazy. There were all these ascetics, and they were chanting, and they had these poles that they tied to their penises that they were kind of swinging around. And I was looking at her, and I'm like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. But it's interesting, right? People's perceptions around what different cultures and what India is changing so much. Things like, you know, globalization, technology, they're allowing people from different walks of America to experience India in a very different way. So I'll meet people from Tucson, Arizona, who have spent, you know, a year in Delhi and completely understand the city of Delhi. They can tell me where to eat over there better than and, you know, they're completely Caucasian American, but they've had that exposure over there. So even though there's things which are changing, there's still perceptions that are out there in the media that come about certain countries and certain cultures, which still feel so primitive to me. And I feel like cinema is a wonderful way to really provide a voice to the people in places that breaks down what CNN does to it. Like, we were watching Kinyarwanda yesterday, and when you're looking at these films that come from conflict zones, it's so incredible to remember that there are people there, not headlines. And it feels like with our film, you know, it's one thing when you're kind of doing it and just getting into the story, but when you have finished the process and you kind of look back at what you've done and what you've achieved, and maybe, you know, it was a little bit latent while you were going through it, but you kind of feel a sense of pride that you're trying to illustrate a different shade of what your culture is, and that's very important to us. It really feels like it's something which, no matter how much the world is changing, it could still use a little more change in that direction.
And one of the things that our director, Alec, and you may remember this from yesterday, he says at the beginning of the film is when you go when you're sitting there watching Kinyarwanda, forget about everything you've seen up to this. It's, you know, it's a new way of looking at it. And it would be nice if, you know, I mean, obviously that's why when I was asked to go, I asked, you know, is it safe? Because, you know, I was taking what I had seen and what I knew as gospel. You know, and if there was some way to, have audiences just go into films, expecting a new experience instead of, I don't know if that's possible to even make that happen, but, expecting a new experience and look at things completely different, just open their minds up.
Yeah, just to go on that, like when I look at countries like Rwanda or Iran, Bosnia, when I see them through the films that I get to experience at festivals, it's so important to me. Like I was speaking with a DJ who's a friend of ours, and we were discussing most awesome cities to party in the world, and top of his list, Lahore, Pakistan. Didn't really think that was like, then you hear the stories of Lahore, Pakistan, and you're kind of like, wow, and you would never get that, like just kind of watching popular media, watching the news and stuff like that. It's just so lost on you. So just to that point.
I was just going to kind of circle back to what was mentioned with the Think Like a Man movie, and also just what Raymond and John have been saying, is that I think it's interesting that, to me, in my experience so far, it just seems like there's a disconnect between audiences and what is actually available to people to see, because and obviously, being that we are at film festivals, everyone here is interested in film, so that is kind of a self-selecting factor. But in general, I just don't believe that people are only interested in watching, only their own gender or race on television. I can attest to the fact that clearly if that was true, I would never watch television. So it's just not, it's not true. And I think there's something going on with people that actually get to make decisions and say what gets made, because there's just this misconception, and when we put things in like niche groups, like this is a black movie release, or this is just only for women, and so we won't, really market it and put the word out to a wider audience. I think that there's something that needs to be changed, but not in terms, I don't think the problem is with the audiences. I do think that people are open to watching anything that's just a good story and entertaining.
Yeah.
I come at this from a very different place, because I'm a white guy in a predominantly white culture, and in America still is to some degree, although I feel that's changing very rapidly, and boy, the Republicans are really worried about that. But I say hang on to your specialness as long as you can. Hang on to your uniqueness as long as you can, because we're in a business where you only get noticed if you stick out and make noise. And probably noticed this about Hollywood people. They can't wait to say, I'm a Hollywood maverick. I'm not part of the system. Of course, they all are. And same thing with the media, mainstream media. It's all mainstream media, folks, every single one of these networks. But, I say, I wouldn't have made this movie if Ray was white. I would have had no interest in it whatsoever. Another white guy with another white story, not interested. I can't get noticed with that story. So I say, embrace your uniqueness. Look at this festival. Here's this man, Roger Ebert, who's collected films that most people probably won't have an opportunity to see unless he shines his light on it. And he did that because you made something unique. You stick out. It's different. That's the only thing you have going for you if you don't have the giant machine behind you that is Hollywood. If you're a big studio picture, you're going to get. They force their movie down people's throats. They control everything about it. So this is the way to get noticed. And I say, embrace your uniqueness as long as you can, because once it's over, it's over. I once read an article where the early days of Saturday Night Live, all the performers had kind of a fuck you attitude towards television and everything. Of course, look what happened to them within 8 years. They're all part of it. They're all making shitty movies. The one time that you saw them when they were great is when they had the fuck the system attitude. And, when you lose that, you're just part of the problem. So that's how I look at it.
Go ahead.
I kind of jump on it a little bit, basing what the discussion is going on is the discrimination in alt. I'm coming from Africa, and being an African on stage and meet different people come from the state who are filmmakers from here, and hearing these stories of discriminating black Americans in the film industry. That scales as Africans to make more films to bring here. Because you're not gonna have a story to tell. Much of the story resides in Africa. We want to tell stories that will teach you coming generations. You didn't know about forgiveness. That's why we make film to tell that there's a way you can forgive. I'm sure much of you people have learned much since yesterday of watching Kinyarwanda. When you come in this room, everybody will say, oh, I didn't know somebody can forgive each other. It's because we make that film, forgiveness, and bring it here, you guys can see that film. So if you can keep on discriminating colors as African, we're not gonna be able to make more films to be bringing in US. We're gonna make our own Hollywood as they did in Nigeria. So we're gonna probably form one unique Hollywood, if possibly. This is, I mean, as representative of Africans on the stage, this is, I didn't know if actually in the state there's that particular discrimination. This is a shame for Americans, please. I'm sorry for saying that. It's very ashamed to see discriminations in art. What the next direction? I'm coming around, I know the reality of discriminations. If you don't sit down and talk about these things, overcome discrimination, you're gonna create problems that in the future, generation will pay us back. As we do pay us back, what will happen home? You keep things in your heart, you don't discuss about this black and white and stuff, you keep on raising a bomb that when it's going to explode, I'm sure no one will be able, to tackle that. This is very hard and very ashamed and very disappointed as an African to be here and to listen to discriminations. Listen, first, best film on box because it's African film doesn't get shown. You should be ashamed for this. I'm sorry to jump up a little bit, but I have to mention that. Yeah. Thank you.
No, please don't apologize at all. When you speak the truth, you don't have to apologize for that. So what's the plan for your films after the festival is done? Because we come here and we have a wonderful experience. We experience a lot of films, and then we go out there and come next week, the Avengers will be on 9,000 screens everywhere, and there won't be, there won't be an opportunity to see Phunny Business or to see the other films. So how can we be more engaged, I guess, in making sure that there is this significant life for your films beyond the festival circuit? Because I mean, the festival circuit is great, but this is not reflective of the people who are out there who also need to see these films. So I'm just curious as to what your plans are beyond the festivals. Do you have distributors? Have you started distribution? Those kinds of things. So
I'll jump in on that. So we've had a really interesting experience with the film. It's been a labor of love for us. We spent 7 years making it, and we premiered the film last year at the Berlin Film Festival. We had our North American premiere at Tribeca, and we've been playing for about 10, 11 months on the festival circuit. It's been very nice. But at the same time, it's important for us to get the film out to audiences. It's important for us to recoup our money and kind of, take things to the next level, make more projects. It has been an incredibly difficult journey, despite the critical appreciation, despite the festivals, to get the film out. We have chosen to self-distribute the film, and we're actually opening in theaters across North America on June 15th. The level of effort that it has taken to tie all of that together and bring the team together has been as hard as making the film. It has required us to kind of, after that journey of getting the film made, getting it distributed, has taken a biblical amount of strength to kind of bring the team to a point at which that emotionally, physically, logistically, we're able to tie everything together and get the movie out. But for us, what was so interesting was we saw the opportunity in sharing the film both with American art house audiences as well as with niche Indian audiences that exist across America. So for us, it was very much about, can we target a niche in a way in which we feel like the expenditure that we're going to put into this after spending so much on the movie is going to have an ability for the film to be seen, but also allow us to kind of, recoup our expenses. And I think when you get into, for a lot of the cinema that's here, when you get into marketing and distributing it, and if you're able to carve out niches in which you can get the film to, whether it's theatrically, VOD, online, or through any of these channels, it makes the whole proposition very different all of a sudden. You're not competing with just the studio films that are out there that are opening every Friday for people who are looking for a film to go to. You're able to kind of create a cultural event in which you can direct people, which completely changes the equation. It's not just a movie, it's an experience. If you're able to find communities in which you can cultivate that, I think it starts to create a very exciting prospect for your film to have a life that's out there. And just to share with folks, we're doing everything that we can to be innovative about how we're getting the film out there. We have, in about 6 months' time, you'll have the ability to buy the film on Facebook and watch the film on Facebook. We are working with a company out of Austin called Tug, where they are like a Groupon for film distribution, where you can actually have so for example, our film will not be opening in Tucson, Arizona. If someone would like it to screen there, they have the ability to set up a screening at their local AMC and sell tickets, and if they sell enough tickets, the film will then be shown there through this service. So there are all kinds of very interesting new models that people are using through technology, which are starting to help us break down those barriers, but these all, at this point, it feels like interesting experiments which have not yet led to people making a consistent income, having a predictable revenue stream. But it feels like these are the experimentations that are going to lead to something which will allow a lot of the kinds of films that we're seeing over here and a lot of fresh voices get out there.
Kind of piggybacking what Jay said, we're actually, theoretically, and I said this last night at the Q&A as well, we should be done. We were coming out on DVD on May 15th. We're on VOD now and slowly rolling out across the country. But because of the timeline and because it is actually during the 100 days of the commemoration of the genocide, we thought maybe trying to bring the film back out on the road again to private institutions, might be a good idea. So we had initially targeted the anniversary week, this April 7th week, and then kind of turned that into anniversary month. And now the idea is we're actually rolling around the country in a car, taking this film to as many places as possible over those 100 days. Because for a film like ours, again, it faces obstacles, theatrically and things like that. So, but because it's a dialogue-driven film, while we love the idea of people buying a DVD when it comes out on May 15th, or watching it on VOD, having that experience with an audience and having a dialogue afterwards with the folks who were responsible for the film is a far more engaging experience. So we are, and we were fortunate enough. For a while, it looked like it was going to be me and my car, and that was it. And I was trying to get our Rwandan team over here, and RBC Capital Markets actually sponsored bringing Ishmael here 3 days before the tour started. They sent us, a nice, check, and Ishmael got to come, and he's been on the road with us for the last 10 days, and he's seen 15 states by car. We've screened the film, I think, 8 or 9 times in that period. And sure enough, we're having this great dialogue, and something is building. Something completely new, and we should be walking away from the film. Right. Something completely new is building. And that, to me, is incredibly exciting. Come July 17th, and, when the commemoration's over, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. But we have our actors coming over, too, from Rwanda, so the sponsorship was actually pretty cool.
How big is your car?
It's getting smaller. We're collecting lots of souvenirs.
We have a distribution plan, we have 5 years on our releases from all the comedians in our films, so we are going to milk it every day between now and the end of the 5 years in every way possible. Internet, college tour, home video deal. There are two schools of thinking about this, but Black History Month has turned out to be a great thing for us because it's a hook by which we can sell the movie again, and we are recutting our movie into a Black History Month television special, which will premiere in 80% of the country February of next year in the syndication market. Now it means we have to go in and put in commercial breaks and do coming up next, those kind of bumpers they do on TV, but that potentially is a lucrative thing for us. I don't want to give anybody the impression, it's not a job when you make an independent documentary. It's not enough to make a living. It's a passion project, but you want to get your money back, and it'd be very nice to make something, and we're on target to do that. And you don't make it for the reasons of becoming like a wealthy person. You make it because you really want to make it. But we also want to get our movies seen. Syndicated TV is a great way to have it seen. It's free television. We know the home video market will be good. Again, we signed with a company that targets African American audiences. They're a niche company. They wouldn't have noticed us if we weren't unique and different, I don't think. We toyed with theatrical distribution, but we would have had to put up some money, and we kind of had a rule of thumb about that. We don't want to put up any money. We want you to give us the money. So that was kind of our standing rule. And then, I've started to do college tours. There's a lot of universities that have budgets, as I think everybody here knows. And then, of course, this festival has been really helpful. We got a call from Helsinki last week, wants to bring the movie over. So, Roger's so well respected, and having his imprimatur on your film, it's a big deal still. And people notice you, and universities are like, well, if he says it's good, and that's great. And thanks to Roger Ebert for that.
It's interesting, the one thing that, John, as we've gone through this process, from my perspective, that I found interesting in thinking about this underrepresented thing, I think that as far as the distribution goes, I may have encountered maybe one Black person in this whole process, where that I'm talking about from any distribution companies. I think we have one which was Code Black, is the only one I think that probably distributes product nationally.
And they said no.
Yeah, they did actually.
BET said no too, twice.
So, and then, but even on the video distribution or any side, and I just thought, wow, but I know folks, if you look at the numbers and you look at the economics of it, why is this? And maybe this has something to do with why, the product is so narrow, or that products like the films that appear here at this festival don't get the notoriety or the publicity or sort of distributed, the way they should be. And I wonder if it goes back to sort of this notion of ownership, like who is controlling the means of this production, or who is controlling this sort of distribution channels and deciding. And we too have been all over the country at different film festivals from, there was a lady in, I think, Santa Barbara, California, was like 84-year-old, far right-wing Republican that really liked our movie. And then, there's, 15-year-old kids in New York that really like. So, we just started like, wow, why is this so narrow? Like, there's only these little opportunities for folks to see this movie. And I think it goes back to, who's in control of the wheels that spin this whole thing. So for me, that says opportunity. So I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm really interested in that part of this business.
Something that we experienced, Raymond, which is what you were saying in terms of like the access that's out there. We never got from the industry what we got from the audiences. Mm-hmm. The audiences would come up to us, and not people that we knew, just at festivals and stuff like that, and they would spend like 5 minutes with us telling us about how, even though they had never been to India, they could feel the family drama within this film in their own lives, and it impacted them in this way, and this had happened. And we would just hear them in Berlin, in Mexico, like all over the world. So you felt that there was a universality that somewhere, we had connected with. And audiences would come up with that, but distributors, I guess it was a combination of refusing to take the risk and then also being able to access those audiences in a way in which they understood the economics of how to do that. A lot of what we're doing is not, maybe 20% of what we do is innovative in terms of distribution. 80% is just proactive. And it surprises me how much distributors are unwilling to take that step. The people who control those channels that you were talking about were unwilling to take that step. And it was more about kind of pushing product through the pipeline in a way in which it was set up to do a particular thing. And that was, it felt very limiting, not just because interesting films were not being able to get out because of it, but there was a lot of money that was actually being left on the table for these guys. But so I guess it's become part of our journey to figure out how to do that. And something that we're trying to be good about is kind of sharing that with other filmmakers as well, because we didn't really get that much, advice. Like, we get anecdotal advice, but we haven't had that much kind of like going through it. You end up kind of doing a lot of stuff yourself. So.
And here's my best advice: get an Academy Award nominated actress to be in it. Without Vera Farmiga, I don't think Higher Ground would have got. She directed, she starred, she's got the money, right? Even though it's a little tiny, low budget film, she was able to get it to people like Sony Pictures Classics, right? Who it's going to go around the world, you guys. It's going to be in Italy. I mean, I can't imagine what those Italians are going to think of those tongue-speaking scenes, but they're going to get exposed to some American culture they haven't seen before.
I'd love to just use that opportunity as a segue to kind of ask my actor a question.
Sure.
He's not Academy Award nominated yet, but he's actually got a very interesting background. Nawaz has been working in India for the past 14 years. He's a graduate of the National School of Drama. He is known as one of India's very well-respected character actors. In the past year, he has had 8 films which are going to be released this year. So they've been shot over the last 2 or 3 years, but 8 of them are coming together and coming out in theaters. He has just been, 2 of his films have just been accepted to the Cannes Film Festival and are playing in competition over there, a film called Miss Lovely and a film called Gangs of Wasipur. And those are films in which he's playing lead roles. So I guess my question, Nawaz, to you is, how has life changed over the past year? And how are you feeling about your films and them coming out into the market right now? तो ज़िंदगी कैसा shift हुआ है ये साल में और जो films बाद जो अभी निकल रहा है क्या सोचते हैं उनके बारे में?
शुरू में हम जो बॉम्बे में फार्मूला फिल्में बनती थी जिसमें सेट होता था पूरा कि ये स्टार है और ये हीरोइन है और एक विलन आएगा और उसको मार देगा बाद में दोनों मिल जाएंगे. Formula film हमारे यहाँ पे चल बहुत.
The majority of cinema that gets made in India has a very simple formula to it. There's a hero, there's a villain, and there's a heroine. And the hero defeats the villain, and the hero and the heroine get together at the end of the movie, and it's that simple.
तो ये अब फिर अच्छा ये पूरा डायनेस्टी थी जो स्टार जो 60s में रहा उसका बेटा कर रहा है उसका बेटा कर रहा है ये पूरा उन्हीं के वही लोग वही फिल्में चलती हैं वही उन्हीं को देखते थे लोग.
There's a dynasty of film families in India which started from the 60s where you have a star that's at the top and the only people who have the opportunity to perform are the children of those stars. It's a very set industry.
तो अब मेरे जैसे लोग आए ट्रेनिंग लेके आए तो जब मैं गया मिला लोगों से शुरू में बहुत स्ट्रगल करना पड़ा तो लोग देखते थे एक्टर हो दिखते तो हो नहीं.
He said when he first started off there was a great deal of struggle when people would look at him and say you're an actor but you don't look like an actor.
तो फिर उसके बाद टीवी सीरियल टीवी इंडस्ट्री थी उसमें भी टीवी इंडस्ट्री में स्ट्रगल किया तो उसमें भी ये था कि सब ग्लॉसी और सब ब्यूटीफुल ग्लॉसी सब कुछ ये दिखना चाहिए है तो उसमें बैगर का भी रोल कर रहा है कोई तो उसको भी 6 फुट और लंबा चौड़ा होना चाहिए वो ज़रूरी था.
He said his first foray was into television to try and find a home over there, but even the supporting roles over there required 6 foot tall hero like hunks in order for it to be able to work, and he fell short of that.
तो उसमें एक्सेप्टेंस नहीं मिली क्योंकि एक तो एक दिन में एपिसोड बनता है पूरा और एक दिन में एपिसोड बना के उनको टेलीकास्ट करना होता है. मेरे जैसे फेसेस को नहीं ले सकते क्योंकि उसमें लाइट या उसमें टाइम ज़्यादा लगेगा. एक तो शॉर्ट हाइट है और लाइट ज़्यादा, बेबी लाइट ये सब लगानी पड़ेगी, तो बहुत इसलिए वहाँ से भी रिजेक्शन हो गया.
He's saying he was rejected from television because you have to turn TV shows around in a day, and if you're going to work with him, you have to use more lighting because he's darker skinned, and people were just against that. So that was where TV fell apart for him.
हाँ, एपिसोड बना के टेलीकास्ट करना होता.
Yeah, they had to broadcast very quickly, and they wouldn't want to spend the extra effort to light him and to kind of profile him.
Then फिल्म्स में आए, फिल्म्स में एक सीन सोचा, एक सीन करेंगे, शायद 2 सीन मिल जाएंगे उससे, लेकिन वो ऐसा नहीं हुआ. 5-6 फिल्में कर ली एक सीन में, फिर छोड़ दिया. फिर देखते हैं, ट्राई करके कुछ और करेंगे. देन ब्लैक फ्राइडे हैपेंड, एंड तो ब्लैक फ्राइडे के कास्टिंग डायरेक्टर ने फिर ये आप पतंग मुझे दिया. और इस बीच में 6 साल मेरे निकल चुके थे. 6 years.
After his foray into television, he spent 6 years trying to figure out where he could get a film role. He thought that if he got on screen, one scene would turn into 2, and 2 scenes would turn into more. And it was a 6-year journey trying to figure out what that was. And then eventually it started with a film called Black Friday for him, which was about terrorist incidents that had taken place in India in the 90s. And the casting director for that is what helped him find Patang, which was his first feature film in which he played a leading role. And that kind of kicked things off for him.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask Richard and Doc to weigh in on this distribution question, and I have one more question, and we're going to open it up. So if you want to line up at the mic for your questions, we will be ready for you when that time comes. Can you speak to this question of sort of life beyond the festival for films?
Well, the only thing that I would suggest is hopefully you can show it to the Weinsteins and get them interested. And you just go right to the bank.
But then you have to deal with them. Well, let's see. I just a couple of weeks ago, I had an experience with a very low-tech form of distribution. The actor Crispin Glover, whom you'd probably know from playing the father in the Back to the Future films, and strange characters in other films like Willard and so on, has been making films of his own, and they're he not only makes them himself, but he distributes them himself, and they're the sort of films that, they would have very, very limited audiences, let's say. They embody his particular ideas about narrative, and they show you some things that are sort of hard to unsee. But what he does is he does not let his films be put on DVD. He only shows them in theaters on film, and he travels with them. Before each film, he gives a sort of slide presentation and reading from his books. So it's taken him like 5 or 6 years, but he's actually managed to pay for his, to break even, let's say, by charging for the films and an extra premium for the readings. And it's something that he's done all on his own. It's obviously not something that would work for very many filmmakers, but I suppose that's an extreme example of self-distribution that's actually kind of, if not paid off, at least broken even.
Yeah, I would also recommend too the college campus thing. And the trick with college campuses is to find the right person. I mean, because, you know, at my institution, we have a Center for Inclusion and Diversity. If you call them and say, would I like to show the film, you may get a completely different response than if you call the student organizations or something like that. So I would really encourage you to really tap into that market, because universities do have resources for student programming and those kinds of things, which would bring films like the ones that we've seen here and filmmakers to campus. So I see that we have some people in line there, so we're gonna go ahead and take a question.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. I just wanted to see if all of you had a film that has really touched you or you really enjoy, that has this perspective of unrepresented voices that you could recommend to everyone here. Thanks.
I have one. I would recommend the film Pariah. I don't know if anyone has heard of it. It was a Sundance pick, and it's a film about a lesbian, African-American lesbian coming-of-age story, and it was just one of the most amazing films I've seen this year, and I would highly, highly recommend it to everyone.
I'm so excited that As Separation is going to be here. It's so great. If you haven't seen it, wonderful.
Kind of in line with our film, a film called Fumble Talk has been an inspiring film throughout our journey. We also went through the IFP labs with the filmmaker Sarah Terry, so I highly recommend that. It's a documentary called Fumble Talk.
Okay.
There's a wonderful documentary out there as well right now in theaters called Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which I don't know if folks have had a chance to see, but that's a really compelling portrayal of the world's apparently most renowned sushi chef.
I always recommend the Kinyarwanda because it has specific message to teach. So to me, that's the most powerful to me. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to direct my question to Carolyn Briggs. I've seen The Higher Ground twice. I'm looking forward to seeing it again on Saturday.
That's awesome.
Each time, you know, it's very nuanced. I get something out of it. But I want to direct my question to representation of underrepresented groups, especially to you. For Rwanda and India, they had the context of India and Rwanda, and then I think that helps with making the representation of the group definite. In your case, it was not an actual fundamentalist church. I think you had to filter or create, or somebody had to create the concept of what the fundamentalist church was and how the people behaved and the tensions they have. So I think your representation was quite a bit different. Can you comment just briefly on the process you used?
It's in the film, Corinne, Vera Farmiga's character, my alter ego, is not so much struggling against the church as she is struggling against herself. So she, even though she's in a setting where women's participation isn't encouraged as far as leadership roles, and she runs up against a lot of cognitive dissonance, her struggle is an internal one. So I think that's what comes through. I hope it does. Thank you for your question.
Hi. I was listening before to everyone was saying about the uniqueness of who you are, adding to you having a niche and you having a hook. And I worked in distribution for a number of years, and I just saw how strictly segregated everything was. I'm not naming names, but I worked for, a company that was really focused on women's cinema. I worked for another company that was really very focused on independent / multicultural cinema. So it's like, oh, you can get a hook if it's from another country and it's like considered exotic, or you can get a hook if it's just women, or you can get a hook if it, whatever. It was always very separate, and on the one hand, yes, I do see that, yes, that does help to get you noticed, to get you some notoriety, but I'm wondering, question for everyone, as artists, we're constantly talking about how to get our product out, how to get people to see the films, and it's very hit or miss. Like, people don't seem to really be talking to one another, you know? And it's like, how do you think that we as filmmakers, as artists, can really start a dialogue to, you know, come together and help each other to get, you know, our work out there? Because, you know, there's certain things coming out, you know, models for distributing online, and, you know, some people go the theatrical route, you know, there's all these, everyone's working in isolated little pockets, you know, and I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on how we can somehow not take control of the system, but create our own model, you know, that would really benefit the artists?
Can I say just something a little bit about that? You know, I've always discovered that when I've called up people and asked for help, I usually get it. The worst they can tell me is no, and I try and embarrass them into saying yes. But you know, we called a filmmaker who was out ahead of us with another film about comedians, and Jordan Brady, who had a film called I Am Comic. He basically downloaded his entire experience to us, everything from bad distribution deals he had signed, and when you go to Showtime, make sure and say this. And, you know, really, we found that if you asked, you got help. There's a few people who didn't. And I do have this view of Hollywood. It is a club. They don't really want you in. You know, it's theirs. Now our job is to get in their club by hook or by crook, you know. I love the title of this band, Rage Against the Machine. I don't know the band well. I just like the title. You're either the rage or you're the machine. You know, when you're not the machine, you're outside raging. And so I think there's a way into all these clubs. You just got to keep knocking on the door. It is easier for some people than others, but we found we got help when we asked for it. And nobody has the perfect model, especially when you're an independent. And I love what you're doing. And, you know, really, you go back to the beginning of the record industry in this country. Leonard Chess used to sell his records out of the trunk of his car. This is not new. I love what musicians have done. They've, you know, they said screw the system, and they've developed their own thing. I know they've taken a financial hit, but they were, you know, some of them are doing quite well with their new model. You look at these bands, they all have a different way of combination of touring and selling. And, you know, I think now with this unlimited amount of media available to us, just one other quick thing for me. When I go to colleges now and the young people want to show me their films, they always say, "Can we see your early work?" And I say no. Because my early work is on crummy 16mm black and white film with a tape splice and bad audio. Theirs is on a high-def camera cut on their Sony laptop. It looks great. They're visually sophisticated. So, you know, really, boy, are we in an age of self-publishing and self-distribution.
I agree with John, and don't be afraid to ask people, because the one commonality that this panel shares is that we are in the minority because we're independent filmmakers. And we have an obligation to other filmmakers to share whatever information we can with you. You know, and if you do ask, you will get answers.
Yeah, just to add on that, the anecdotal advice that we've been getting is amazing, just like John mentioned. It surprises me that there aren't more online resources which synthesize that content, because there's a gross lack of transparency in the independent film industry. If you were operating as a startup in any other industry, you'd have access to pricing information, margins, all of that kind of stuff, deal structures in a more clear way. It would be amazing to see an online resource that brought a lot of that together. There are places like Ted Hope's blog, Truly Free Film and Film Specific, that have kind of started to make inroads, but if I had a place to download or dump a lot of the information and learnings and vendors and partners that we used on this, I would love the opportunity to do that. I would use and pay that resource if anyone is interested in starting.
Yeah.
So we need that last question. Okay,
oh, excuse
go
me.
ahead. And then, go ahead, Richard. I just want to get to the last question.
Are there no online discussion groups for independent filmmakers?
There are tons of them. I guess there's just not, I mean, there's really tons of them, but it's just about finding something that's authoritative and comprehensive. There's just information hidden across the internet, which, you know, it would be nice to get something that was synthesized.
And I'll just jump in real quick. Distribution, just from my perspective and working with filmmakers, is probably one of those areas that's often overlooked. It's mentioned, but it's not dug into specifically at the beginning of production. And another thing Eric said yesterday was like the audience helps complete the film. But I wish more filmmakers would think about the audience, not that they don't, but to think about them specifically and how to reach that audience and actually start the distribution process at the beginning, even in development. Where are you going with the film? It's a great story, but I think sometimes there's this unrealistic reliance on the machine, and that if I tell a good story, the machine's gonna be there for me and help me to get it out to a wide audience, which we're finding just doesn't happen. And so the distribution piece, one, takes a lot of time, particularly if you're doing self-distribution. It takes a lot of time to market the film, to find the niche audience. And I do think that we just have to work harder and to be more transparent. So even as you go through the process, make notes of what you're doing and be willing to share that with other filmmakers very specifically, not in theory, but really specific. Contact this person, contact this group. You know, if you're looking to do this, this is where you can do it in this city, in that state. And I think the more work we do on that end, then independent filmmakers will really see the fruits of their labor and be able to get to more audiences more consistently than just, you know, one-off, and every time everybody has to go through the same difficult process to do distribution.
Thank you. Go ahead and get a concise question here to wrap
Sure,
things
sure.
up.
Well, thanks for a great discussion. I have a question for Carolyn Briggs. I still haven't seen Higher Ground. I read lots of stuff about it. I'm looking forward to it, and I just want to ask you because I'm from Poland, and it's a like predominantly Catholic country. That's an understatement. I'm a very secular person, but I would like your movie to open in our country because I think that it can sort of create incentive for people to examine their own religiousness, because I think that people in general are very reluctant to do that because they perceive it as sort of like an assault or their identity a little bit. And I would like just if you could tell us a little bit about how religious people reacted to your film. I mean, you said that they found it a little bit too secular, but did you like encounter any specific life stories or like reactions that were sort of significant to you in that respect?
One of the best things about the film for me is that I am receiving so many emails from people who want to tell me their story. And so many people say about Higher Ground, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one who broke off from faith or struggled with faith, who wanted faith and who couldn't make it real. That's her last speech. I want it to be real and I can't make it real. So there's an audience out there for this film, and they're just I have to admit, I've got some preaching emails, some emails that are trying to bring me back into the fold. But for the most part, it's just people who say thank you. And that's what we as filmmakers all want to do, write stories that people see themselves in and understand themselves better. So thank you for your question.
So at the close, I would like to close with this one question, because since we're talking about underrepresented groups, voices and groups, I always feel when you are given that responsibility for bringing that group to the mainstream, there's this tension between how much of them do I share with the world, and are they going to misunderstand my sharing? So my last question is, as you were making your films, was there anything that you, for example, speaking in tongues can be very, people who don't have that experience always sort of view it in through a very sort of lens of this, like, well, that's really bizarre. So I guess my question is, did any of you have things where you said, you know what, they're just not going to get this, they're going to misread this, and we just can't put it in because we don't have the time to sort of explain it in a way where people are going to get it? So if you could all speak to that, then we'll wrap things up. We'll start with you, Carolyn.
Somebody once said, when you have a writer in the family, you have an assassin in the family. And the same thing is through writing about the church. Having a writer who wants to write openly and honestly about her experience in the church is in some ways like having an assassin, somebody who's going to do great harm. However, I believe that we spoke the truth in love.
Ray and I hope you agree with this, Ray, we looked at Goodfellas and the Don King movie. I'm a structure thief. I look at other people's structure and say, can this apply to our story? And we looked at that because we felt both those films had a protagonist who says, you want to know how the mafia works? I'm going to tell you. You want to know how the boxing world works? I'm going to tell you. So we looked at this as, you want to know what it's like to start a black comedy club in the south side of Chicago with no previous experience? I'm going to tell you. And so that's how we approached our storytelling. Nothing was off the table. You know, it's not that we're a documentary and Goodfellas is scripted, but we did, that's why Ray is so dominant in the movie, telling his story. And there were a few things he wouldn't let us say, or he didn't want to tell. This is Ray's story according to Ray.
Well, you know, it's interesting when you asked that question, and obviously that was one of the areas that we probably struggled with, and I struggled with the most, and he probably pushed me beyond. Most of what you see, I probably would have never done. But the notion of, and I guess as a black male, it's like there's a sensitive area that's sort of like, I don't want to fit into that stereotypical, and then folks would say, well, you know, it has to be sensational. We want all the sensation. Have you ever been robbed? Were there any murders? Were there any rapes and pillage? I mean, literally, I mean, people actually, and I thought, well, if there was, I probably wouldn't tell you. I mean, from a cultural standpoint, but from the dramatic standpoint, I do get it, you know, the blood on the page and this whole thing. But it was a really fine line sort of to walk, for me anyway, in telling these stories and making it engaging and really, you know, sharing this particular story. But that was one of the areas that, and this notion, someone asked me last night about black comedy, and like, why do you even call it that? And it's like, I don't call it that. I was a person who owned a comedy club. I'm black, with that appealed to sort of black comedians and a black audience, but that doesn't make it sort of a black comedy, if you will. And that's a fine nuance, but it was something that was really big for me. But anyway, that sort of made it interesting. I'm glad he pushed me that way, because I think it makes the movie that much more interesting.
Yes, I was definitely concerned, and as I said, it's something that you think about in all your portrayals of characters, because you do have, you know, when there's disproportionate representation of people like you feel a responsibility to always make it a certain way, and that can be a challenge in just representing real life experiences. And here I had, you know, just under a half hour, you know, short film length to make something that I didn't want to be, you know, damaging to women, but at the same time, it's dealing with someone who's obsessed, you know, with a relationship, which is obviously not something it's something that's done all the time. But I guess I just tried to approach it from a real perspective and make her, you know, realize things that I think we all realize at the end of it, that her relationship didn't define her, and try to just have a character arc, I think, is the best that you can do, is have some sort of a resolution and make your character three-dimensional while still being able to poke fun at yourself and at the character. So it's a challenge, and it's going to continue to be a challenge.
I think for us, I'm not sure if it was the audience not understanding a portion of it, but we chose to not focus the lens on kind of the religious conflict that had torn the city apart that we were filming in order to really give light to the emotional stories of the people and the families that were living there. It was kind of like a backdrop, like the political tensions were like a backdrop to what we had, but they were never made overt, so that we could really focus on the on day-to-day life. And the director always says a line that he found the magic in the mundane, and I think that was kind of our choice.
As an actor, तो यही है कि क्या मुझे जैसे एक एक्टर का होता है कि उसको वो दिखाने जैसे टैबको है या बेली है या इस तरह की चीज़ें, तो स्टे फिट, बाकी डायरेक्टर के ऊपर है, जो कुछ देखना चाहे देख ले.
The actor, as an actor, he's kind of focused on making sure that he's within character, but in terms of what he can or can't show, that is his director's responsibility.
For me, there were two things. One I was flat out wrong about, and Alric will talk about it at screenings. I went to him and I said, "There's no way we're going to be able to market a film called Kinyarwanda. You know, in America, people aren't going to understand, you know, what that means." And the further we got into our journey, I found out that, I mean, obviously, the film has had a really strong following. And the more it became about identity and, identifying the Rwandan, people as having their own language, which is something that none of us knew, it became even more important that I was wrong. The other thing that I struggled with, and I don't think I ever even said this to Alric, but it was just about coming from this culture and I guess expecting people to buy the fact that somebody's going to forgive someone for, killing their family, and just, expecting audiences to embrace that. And I think the beauty of the whole journey at this point has been the fact that we as not necessarily us as filmmakers, but I think distributors very often underestimate audiences and their capacity for compassion. And it's actually, I'm so thrilled that that assessment was, was wrong and that, embarrassed it was even a concern.
All right. Well, I'd like to ask you to thank our panel. This has been really wonderful. So we're going to take about 10 minutes to change over, and the second panel will begin. Thanks a lot for your time and attention.
Yeah, that's good. It's 10:24.